Dawn, do you have anything? Okay, if not, then we're going to get right into the message. Obviously, we talked about the Magi last week as they came and they worshiped the Christ child who had been born in Bethlehem. Matthew, we are going through the book of Matthew right now. We started right at the beginning of Advent. And as we go through the book of Matthew, we're being reminded again and again that Matthew's concern is to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, the King Messiah. And as he's doing that, he's selecting and highlighting things that are going to prove to the Jewish readers. And if you read the book of Luke, Luke is writing to the Greek readers. And he says, I'm doing a thorough investigation. If you read John, John's highlighting things that the other gospel writers didn't talk about as he writes to all Christians. And if you look at Mark, Mark wrote an action gospel aimed at the Romans. It's shorter, action, 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 because Romans were action-oriented people. And so Mark just gives kind of the highlights of Jesus' ministry in 16 chapters. Matthew is 28 chapters. But Matthew's going out of his way to talk to the Jewish readers. And so he really highlights the fulfilled prophecy and speaks to them in a way that they can understand. By the way, a lot of times when you look at the prophetic utterances that Matthew talks about, as a Gentile reader with a Western mindset, you look at it and go, that fulfills what? But in the Jewish mind, he was attempting to reach the Jewish mind. It made perfect sense. So we'll talk about some of those prophetic things today as he says this fulfilled that or it did that. So anyway, Matthew has highlighted the virgin birth because he had to deal with the issue of, Jehoiakim had been cursed as one of the last kings of Israel, and the Lord had said through a prophet, that none of his descendants would sit on the throne. Well, that was a problem because it was supposed to be one of his descendants that would become King Messiah, and if he's not going to sit on the throne, he's not going to be King Messiah. And so Joseph was in that line. Matthew takes care to point that out. And then Joseph adopts Jesus. So he has the full authority. Adoption then would have given the full authority of his heritage. So he didn't have the blood. None of his bloodline is going to sit on the throne. But Jesus had the rights. And then he got the bloodline of David through Mary. And Matthew's going out of his way to highlight for Jewish minds how all of this fits together in a way that, blesses us obviously still today. And then he has the Parthian kingmakers. By the way, Herod, in order to take the throne, had to drive the Parthians out of Judea. So when they come riding back into Judea, he's not real pleased about this. It would have felt like they were doing a foray to see if there was any weaknesses they could exploit. Are the Parthians coming back? But they were politically focused kingmakers, and they show up and say, hey, where's the one born king of the Jews? The kingmakers. You understand why Matthew included the account. Because the ones who recognize kings were recognizing the one that was born of a virgin in Bethlehem. Very powerful picture. So, anyway, so we've got these guys showing up. They leave Herod, as I've already pointed out. They find Jesus in the house with Mary and Joseph. And then it says in the last verse that we looked at last week that they were warned in a dream. Now remember, Joseph was told in a dream that he could take Mary as his wife because the Holy Spirit had caused the conception and she had not been unfaithful to him. And Joseph had such a major encounter from that experience with an angel that he got up and he took her as his wife. He believed exactly what was said. And then he had to take her from Nazareth down to Bethlehem because of a decree of Caesar Augustus. Anybody watch the Peanuts Christmas special? Linus says, the whole Luke 2 Christmas story again, so. By the way, that was an interesting, every year as people watch that Peanuts story, they hear the message of the Christ child. It's amazing. And that one, by the way, wasn't supposed to happen, but Charles Schultz stood up and said, yeah, this is going to work. And the network suits were going, no, we can't have that in there. And he said, yeah, we are going to have that in there. And he stood his ground. And now every year people are hearing the gospel through that Christmas special message. what's the real meaning of Christmas? That's the whole thing. Charlie Brown's wandering around. What's the whole meaning of Christmas, or the real meaning? Okay, so anyway, we've got this wonderful message that Matthew is sharing with us about the Christ child. And the Magi have gone. They have found him. They have worshiped him. They've given their gifts. They were warned in a dream again not to tell Herod where the kid was. Right? So they take a different route home. And because they take a different route home, Herod doesn't get the information he wants. And that's where we are going to pick up today. I've entitled today's message, it starts in Matthew chapter 2, starting with verse 13, Following Divine Direction. Because all the way through this account, just like where Joseph got the divine direction, marry her, now we're going to hear even more messages. We saw the Magi. Don't go by Herod. They followed divine direction. Now, obviously, it's one of the things that we need to pick up along the way, always. If the Lord's speaking to us, and by the way, he's speaking all the time. The issue is, are we listening? Are we on the same frequency? Are we able to pay attention? When you happen to see a burning bush over on the side, are you able to get through the distractions? As you're walking along. Okay, following divine directions. We are in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. And remember, this is my translation from the Greek language, which means it's always good for you to have your favorite version with you. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of differences in something as basic as this story, but it's good for you to see the different nuances. So, verse 13. When they had departed, significantly, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to seek the child to kill him." So, it's the Magi have just left. They've left the gold. By the way, for this family where Joseph was a carpenter, and they probably weren't totally impoverished like is presented in the scriptures. He was a working individual, and not in the scriptures, in the movies that you see and stuff. He was a working individual, but at the same time, you got to keep working. And you can bet when they were living in that house, up to 2 years after the birth of Christ, probably, at least 6 months, because just based upon when the Magi, how long it would have taken them to traverse the distance. Jesus was probably a year old. They were in a house. Joseph was working as a carpenter, without any doubt. That was his trade, to be able to make ends meet and to be able to help the family. But as a carpenter, you didn't, have a lot of money in the bank. And so the Magi come and they drop off all these gifts and then they leave. And so Joseph and Mary didn't have a whole lot of time to spend them down at the local mall, because things happened very quickly as they were moving along. So when the Magi had departed, an angel of the Lord appeared. This is Joseph's second visitation. He's starting to get used to these things. Right? Visitation. The first one worked out pretty good. The Magi showed up. That one's, major. Can you imagine their faith being built every step of the way? The shepherds show up, said some angels were talking about you guys in the field. Magi show up, said, yeah, Daniel told us about you 500 years ago. All of this happening, and, they're probably totally in awe of what's going on right now. But so Joseph, goes down for the night, and all of a sudden he gets another angelic visitation, and he's warned in this dream, and he's told exactly what's going to happen. You've got some issues coming. You're supposed to leave immediately. Now, by the way, don't think that they just escaped by the skin of their teeth. The angel waited, communicated with them when it was important to communicate with them, that they needed to leave. Sometimes we only get information from God at the point when we really need it. And here's the reason, because otherwise we worry. And we try to take things into our own hands, and we do different things. And so the angel's given specific instructions, and he says, now it's time to go. So Mary and Joseph would be able to pull things together very quickly and get on the road, and without a whole bunch of fuss or muss or any of that stuff. They would just start doing what they needed to do. So the angel said, leave immediately and go to Egypt, because Herod is about to come and cause problems. Now, Egypt was about 75 miles from Bethlehem. That's to the border, and then they had to get into Egypt. The nice thing about Egypt is that it was under Roman rule also, so it was governed by the Romans, but it wasn't governed by Herod. which means it was outside of his jurisdiction. They got into Egypt, Herod couldn't follow them. He couldn't find out about them. He couldn't get any details about them. And so he's told to go to Egypt. There were about 1 million Jewish people living in Egypt at about this time. Don't think that Mary and Joseph are going down to an area where no one speaks their language, Aramaic or any of that. They're going down to a very large Jewish establishment in Egypt. When you got 1 million people kicking around, you've got your culture is down there. And so they head out down there, which is why, not only did the gifts of the Magi finance the trip and set them up pretty well, but Joseph, in that Jewish population, would have been able to practice his carpentry again and continue to do what was necessary for him and his family. So, okay, we're in verses 14 and 15. So, when he got up, he took the child and his mother at night and left for Egypt. He was there until the death of Herod, so that the word given by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled that said, "From Egypt I called my son." So Joseph got up. Because the angel said immediately, we assume it's that same night. He could have waited till the next night and got everything together and then left by night so that no one saw them leaving. But it was either the night he woke up or the next night. That's immediately. That's what fits in that context. So he got on the road. He took Mary and he took Jesus and he headed out to Egypt. Like, I guess 75 miles. It's about, when you think about the trip from Galilee down to Jerusalem or Bethlehem, it's, round figure, about 100 miles. So they're on their way south even further and probably up to 150 miles, depending upon where the Jewish community was that they were aiming for. So Joseph got on the road. And they lived in Egypt for a season. He was there until the death of Herod. That wasn't a long time. It depends on what the birth of Jesus was. Tradition scholars often say Herod died in 4 BC. However, there's some major dispute about that because it's based on some, how history is. We're talking 2,000 years ago. We're talking about this person saying something and then this person contradicting them 100 years after the fact. But it was right in the time frames. We know it was between 4 BC, about 2 BC for Herod's death. The majority of scholars would probably be leaning on 4 BC. I would lean a little bit later, but okay, we'll find out in heaven. So anyway, so he stayed there, and he stayed there for a season. How long did it take for Herod to die? Not long, but not long, could have been 6 months, whatever. And he was there until the death of Herod. So the word given by the Lord through the prophets might be fulfilled that said, "From Egypt I called my son." Now this is Matthew kind of jumping ahead. And, I wanted to point out again, I already said it, but funded by the Magi, and then fulfilling prophecy. Now, this is Hosea 11:2. Or 1, excuse me. It's Hosea 11:1. And in Hosea 11:1 it says, "When Israel was a boy, I loved him, and from Egypt I called for my son." Now that's talking about the people of Israel that had been in slavery in Egypt until Moses brought them out. And Israel was a child in Egypt, and then Moses called them, led them out. God called them out of Egypt into the promised land. And that's the immediate reference of that verse. And so Matthew quotes that verse and says, by the way, this is so that the word given by the Lord through the prophet Hosea might be fulfilled that said, "From Egypt I called my son." Now, as Western readers, we go, what? Because we're thinking, that was about Israel. It wasn't about Jesus. But there was a greater fulfillment. And the Jewish people would understand the greater fulfillment. It wasn't just about Israel. Israel was a prototype of the messianic line that would be coming forth. And so the Messiah being called out of Egypt was like the greater fulfillment of that which was written about Israel way back in the days of Hosea. And again, our Western mind goes, when it says this fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet, we kind of think we would like to see, there's one about the Messiah riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. That one's pretty easy, isn't it? Because you see the donkey and you see Jesus and you see the hosannas and the praise and all of that. And our Western mind goes, what a great fulfillment. But we look at this one and we go, okay, but the Jewish people would have been able to handle that, because that's the way that the rabbis handled prophetic words from the scriptures, which talked about the time in which they were living. Remember who's Matthew's target audience is. And it really, obviously, the Holy Spirit knew his target audience would go way beyond the Jewish people, but Matthew, to begin with, is targeting the Jewish people. He wants them to know beyond any doubt how Jesus fulfilled the Jewish scriptures, and he used the traditional way that the Jewish rabbis dealt with prophecy. So, Mary and Joseph are in Egypt, and they're staying safe away from Herod. By the way, remember, just for those of you who weren't here last week, Herod was a ruthless murderer. He was appointed by Caesar Augustus in 40 BC to be king. He had to launch some campaigns, get rid of the Parthians, and about 37 BC is when he took up official and became the king of the area. And he was a great builder. He built the temple. Remember the temple in Matthew 24, that beautiful edifice which the disciples were pointing out? I mean, he built things, again, he built Masada. I mean, it was a beautiful place. He was a major builder, taxed the people like crazy to get that. But later on in his life, as we talked about last week, he became very paranoid. And he maybe had a reason for it. You know, if people are out trying to get you, it's not paranoia to think that people are out trying to get you. Okay? But he ended up killing 3 of his sons, executing them. His favorite wife, other people around him, he became a bloody tyrant in the last years. And he at his death, he knew that no one was going to mourn him, so he had all of the leaders, the elders of the people of Israel, locked up in their amphitheater with orders that at the word of his death, they were supposed to all be killed, because he wanted the people of Israel to mourn. Some reports were that he had a member of every family, not just the leaders, but a member of every family that had, roots and finances or recognition, whatever, because he wanted all of Jerusalem and Israel to mourn when he died, because he knew they wouldn't mourn otherwise. And fortunately, that order was not carried out. Okay, someone wasn't quite as bloodthirsty as Herod. So we're not talking about a nice guy. We're talking about by this time in his life, the end of his life, he was doing things that were extremely. Remember, Caesar Augustus said that it's better to be Herod's pig than his son. Because he's going to treat the pig better. Because he killed his three of his sons. So, okay. So when it says, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, was very angry. He sent and killed all the male children 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and in all the region around it, according to the time which he had ascertained from the Magi. So Herod was being Herod right here in all of his paranoia. Who knew how long he thought he was going to live? Maybe he thought they'd put the baby on the throne instead of him. Who knows? But he called it the trick of the Magi, that he had been tricked by the Magi, misled, deceived. They had been warned in a dream, remember, so they went a different way home. It probably wasn't long after the Magi were supposed to be, because you got to figure it was only 5 miles, and on horse, it wouldn't have taken that long. They'd have found the child, maybe stayed a day or two, and then come back, and they weren't coming back, and so Herod realizes, I have been tricked. And he probably sent out some patrols and said, where are they? And they weren't anywhere to be found. So he said, hey, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to make sure this isn't a threat to me in the future. So he sent and killed all the male children. It doesn't say who he sent, but we all know he sent his soldiers, or he sent his special guard, or he sent some people there to do some grave damage to the children that were 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and the region around Bethlehem. And that was because, remember it said last week, we studied where he had ascertained when the star had appeared? He wanted to know right when the star appeared, and as he's investigating, he finds out when the star appears. Now he can figure, okay, the child was born here, however long it took for the Magi to come, and now I'm going to make sure. And Herod is not going to, risk anything. He probably doubled the age. So when it says 2 years, it was probably, he's assuming that the Christ child's about 1 right now. So he said every male child 2 years old and under. The early church started to talk about, thousands died and, whatever, more than likely around Bethlehem. Yeah, those stories grow, but more than likely based upon infant mortality and the population, the estimates are about 20, maybe less than 30 is the estimate. That's a lot of kids. But it's not thousands, which is, what church tradition began to develop. But it was a grievous, Herod was not a nice person. Bloodthirsty monster is all you could do. In an attempt to stop the Christ child, the parallels, a deliverer was coming to Israel in Egypt, and Satan incited Pharaoh to begin killing the male child. Satan likes to take out those who are going to cause damage to his kingdom. He knows the times and seasons better than any of us. He understands family lines and promises that have been given to families, and he will work hard to destroy what he can. And he missed it. Satan was working through Herod here, and he missed it. He couldn't get the Christ child. Because always remember, it's not just Herod. It's the one behind Herod who's attempting to kill the Christ child and stop the promises. And it just wasn't going to work. Okay. Joseph avoided this. How did Joseph avoid this? He obeyed a dream. Okay. You understand, he gets a dream and he has to go on, probably with a donkey, but 100 miles to 150 miles. And just has to take off and go into parts unknown, trusting totally that God's going to watch over him and his new family. And, that's a big deal. By now, Mary could have been pregnant again very easily, especially in that day and age. And especially with the way that the Israelites had their clean, the purification rites and the way that was set up. That was set up pretty much to make sure they had as many children as they possibly could. Just bluntly, the Lord wanted them to be fruitful and multiply. The women would become pure again, where their husbands could approach them right when they were at their most fertile time. Okay, do you think that's by accident? Okay, so then the word was fulfilled, spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and much mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and she was not willing to be comforted because they are no more. So this was a direct quote almost from Jeremiah. It's a prophecy of Jeremiah. It's about the exile. Again, it's about something else that was being discussed. In the previous prophecy in Hosea, it was discussing Israel coming out of Egypt at the time of Moses. Now, this prophecy is talking about what happened to northern Israel when it was taken into captivity by Assyria. And this is the statement. A voice was heard in Ramah, poetically, weeping and much mourning, Rachel weeping for her children. Who was Rachel? Well, Rachel and Leah. Jacob's wives were Rachel and Leah. Rachel had become, in the popular mindset, the mother of Israel. And, Leah had more kids than Rachel, and the concubines were all involved with Jacob and all of that. But Rachel had become known as the mother of Israel. And so if the northern kingdoms were taken captive so that they were no more, it would be Rachel weeping. And Ramah was an area north of Jerusalem, not that far from Jerusalem, but remember, Bethlehem was south. So it was the mother of Israel was weeping over the fact that Israel had been taken into captivity. However, the Ramah also became popularly connected to Bethlehem. And so that helped with the whole prophetic picture. And again, Matthew, talking to the Jewish people, says, that was one fulfillment of this, but now look how it was fulfilled again. And the Jewish readers wouldn't have choked on this. Again, Western readers, Matthew, that seems like a stretch. But it's a different mindset between our Greek mindset and way of approaching scriptures and the Oriental mindset. So, okay, Rachel is the mother of the tribes of Israel, which is why Matthew brings her in. Again, he's hammering, this is King Messiah, this is King Messiah, and here are the scriptures that prove it. And to the Jewish readers, they'd say, well, that's pretty impressive, Matthew. Okay, verse 19 and 20. But when Herod had died, note this, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to Israel. for the ones seeking the life of the child have died. So, there's another dream. Oh, not bad for Joseph. Herod died shortly after all of this. Joseph had a third visitation from an angel, and the angel told him it's safe to return. Joseph was getting used to directions from God. I don't know if it ever lightened up for him for the rest of his life, but I do know that he had to really enjoy. It's nice when God's speaking to you and giving you specific direction, because then you know you're walking in the right path. And that's one of the reasons you should always be seeking input from the Lord. Always, always. We want wisdom and understanding from the Holy Spirit, and if we ask for wisdom, we can count on the fact that we'll have wisdom for our decision-making process as we humble ourselves before God. But sometimes, no matter how much wisdom we have, you just need a revelatory word, because you need to understand. I can do all the charts, positives and negatives, and all of that stuff in my life, but sometimes it just takes a revelation from God. And I'm telling you, from experience, I almost said bitter experience, from experience, sometimes you don't want the revelation, okay? Sometimes you get the revelation, and it's clear, and it's God. And, I remember calling up one of our MorningStar covering, and I said, talk me out of this, please. Honestly, that's what I said. I said, this is the word I got from God. Let me explain it to you and share what happened. And now, talk me out of it. I do not want to do this. And this is the word I got back. You're stuck. This wasn't a happy moment in my life. You're stuck. And the reason was because if you don't do this now, and it's obviously God, for the rest of your life, you'll look back and say, did I miss the call of God in my life at a particular point? And who wants that? So he said, you're stuck. And I went, geez, thanks. Because he wouldn't have wanted to do it either. So it's like, he knew. So anyway, so he gets a Joseph's third visitation. By the way, going back home, not such a bad deal, although Egypt was certainly safer. But the Messiah wasn't supposed to grow up in Egypt. Okay, the Messiah was supposed to grow up in Israel and be connected to the Jewish people there. So he gets the word, get up, take the child and his mother, go to Israel because everyone has died. Safe to return. By the way, it is in the plural. We're all thinking Herod died, but there must have been some other people who were involved in the machinations who had also died. God took care of the whole thing so that those who would have still been pursuing the ends of Herod were no longer there. So, verses 21 and 22. Then he got up and took the child and his mother and returned to Israel. But when Joseph heard that Archelaus reigned over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go away from there. Then having been directed in a dream, he left the regions of Galilee. He didn't even want to be around Archelaus. Okay. So he's returning to Israel. He gets close. He gets the report that Archelaus is on the throne. Archelaus was the ethnarch. Now, after Herod's death, everyone expected Archelaus to get the entire kingdom. Now, that had to be approved by Rome, but Herod could say, I want this kid to get the entire kingdom. Herod did not. Herod split the kingdom up, and Rome still had to okay it. And one thing Rome did not do is give any of the kids or grandkids the title king. In fact, Herod Antipas, the one who had Galilee, and some of you will remember this, he is called king sometimes in the Gospels, but it's almost a little mocking because everyone knew that he had petitioned Rome again and again, and Rome had said, no, we're not doing that. But he wanted to be king. He wanted to act like a king, but he was not an ethnarch, but the other tetrarch. Okay, he was one of the tetrarchs, which means 4 territories by the time things got going. Archelaus had 2 of the parts, so he was an ethnarch. And then Herod Philip had where the Decapolis was in Israel. But anyway, so it was split up between them, and Archelaus was not a nice man. As a part of his opening rule of Israel, Josephus tells us that he killed 3,000 Passover celebrants just after he took office. So we're not talking about someone who was a nice man. By the way, compared to Herod, he apparently was a nice man. But he wasn't a nice man. And so when Joseph heard that Archelaus was on the throne, he wisely said, maybe I should go north. I mean, you understand, if you think about who Herod Antipas was, remember, he's the one that eventually killed John the Baptist. Let me see, Archelaus, Antipas. Archelaus, let's go up by Antipas. That tells you all you need to know about Archelaus. Okay, not a very nice person. They say Herod Philip was probably the best of them, but. So anyway, they got into into Israel, and he was afraid to go, and so the Lord gave him a dream. Because now he's going, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And the Lord gives him another dream. And that dream gives him specific direction. Basically says, yeah, you're right to be concerned about Archelaus. Now head north. And fulfills prophecy again. Right in the dynamic of all this, prophecy is fulfilled again. Verse 23. When he arrived, he settled in a city called Nazareth. Thus the word given through the prophets was fulfilled that he'd be called a Nazarene. Now, we all know, because we've read the book of Luke, that they came from Nazareth. Matthew hasn't revealed that information because it wasn't important to him. What was important to him is that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which is where you'd expect the king of the Jews to be born from the Davidic line. And so now Mary and Joseph, and by the way, the reason they ended up in Bethlehem is because they were told they had to go register with their home territories. And so Joseph ended up having to go back to Bethlehem because he was of the house and lineage of David, as Luke 2 says. And so now they come back, and they're thinking, they were probably thinking we're going to live in Bethlehem because that's where the Messiah is supposed to live. They hear about Archelaus, go, maybe not, and so they head back to their hometown. Matthew doesn't tell us it's his hometown, but it doesn't really matter. So they settled in a city called Nazareth. And remember in John chapter 1 when the Lord speaks to, I think it was Nathanael. Yeah, Philip went and got Nathanael. And Philip says, hey, we found the Messiah. And Nathanael says, can anything good come from Nazareth? Okay, Nazareth had a really bad rep. Okay, I mean, it was just like, that was like, I'm not going to mention any cities today. Because I can't think of any offhand, but it would really be rude also. So anyway. But if you live in Green Bay, it'd be like, Detroit. But I'm just saying, that's sports rivalries. You understand, so. But when he arrived, he settled in the city called Nazareth. So Nazareth had a bad reputation. I mean, people just had a... Then there's this prophetic fulfillment. Now, some of your translations say, thus the words given through the prophet was fulfilled, or the prophets, and then they put it in quotes. Well, it's definitely plural, and it shouldn't have quotes, because there is none. There is no prophecy like this in the Old Testament. You just can't find it. Put in, he shall be called a Nazarene, or called a Nazarene, and you're gonna draw a blank. But remember, Matthew was doing what? He was writing to the Jewish people. He said, so when he said, hey, the prophets, plural, said that he would be called a Nazarene, not quoting them, it wasn't about a specific prophecy. It was about how he would be received. How were Nazarenes received? Not very well. We know that because of Nathanael. Can anything good come from Nazareth? My goodness, what is that all about? We do know he would be despised and he'd be rejected of men. That's clear. That's what a Nazarene would be, by the way. Despised and rejected of men. We know that he would be mocked. Psalm 22, you want to read about the mockery that was given to the Messiah. But all the scriptures that mocked and point out the Messiah would be someone who would be mocked are the scriptures that Matthew is referring to. And that fits what a Nazarene would be all about. And so Matthew's saying, the Old Testament scriptures say he would be treated badly by the people around him, and now that's how this was being fulfilled. They moved to Nazareth, and he's going to be called a Nazarene, and he is going to be rejected. and mocked by people, even those he was calling to be his disciple. Now, as we look at this scripture and we're looking at the fact that God's still orchestrating everything, even to the point that he's going to be in Nazareth, and people had a bad opinion in Nazareth, so right up front, it should remind us about some things, though. First impressions, usually not so good, right? If you're making your judgments about people based upon your first impressions, you could have missed the Messiah. Nazareth, I'm never going to. In fact, it's often the way it is. The stuff that you have the most prejudice against in your heart is how the Lord's going to try to meet you. Because you're going to have to humble yourself to get beyond your prejudices. And you can bet that's one of the reasons he ended up in Nazareth, because the Lord was going to, people that were confronting the fact, this is the Messiah and he's from where? They had to get over that prejudice. They had to humble themselves. They had to admit to themselves, I have been wrong. And so we have to do the same thing. Rick Joyner, the apostolic head of our stream, says that the Lord will often come to you in the form or person of someone who you actually would not even want to be around. Because are you going to humble yourself? And that's just the way we are, and we need to get over ourselves so that we're able to receive what the Lord is doing. So anyway, watch how God's trying to speak to you. Follow. When the Lord is speaking to you and you know it's him. And by the way, revelation comes in a lot. When you get an angel in a dream, you wake up and you know you've had an angel in a dream. You don't get up and say, wow, that was a weird symbolic dream. You get up and you say, I just had an angel visit me in a dream who had a conversation with me. That's a high-level dream. And it's one of the times when an angel can appear to us. By the way, there's sometimes when Scripture talks about an angel appearing to someone, and it doesn't say it was a dream, but then it says they woke up. Because angels do that a lot. But they also can appear in person too. It's just whatever. And so, but when you've had an experience and you know it was the Lord, usually the reason it's so clear is it's going to take a whole lot of faith and die unto self to walk it out. Hey, Joseph, get up and, oh yeah, by the way, we know you think that your intended has been unfaithful, but that's not true and you need to marry her. That's pretty hard. More than just because of the fact that Joseph was being told that he could trust Mary, it's because no one else would trust Mary. And his reputation was about to be destroyed. This is a hard word. The Lord made it extremely clear so he would be able to believe it and walk it out in spite of the personal cost to his own reputation, which was going to be shredded by his actions. And then when he gets to Bethlehem, it's like, okay, get up and go to Egypt. Don't go back to Nazareth. Would that have been the easy place to go? Yeah, except it's still under Herod's jurisdiction. And so now they head to Egypt. The angel says you go to Egypt. Besides, there's some prophecy that has to be fulfilled. But now they're headed further away from home. They're headed into parts unknown. And they are ending up, a long way away from home. And so there's this obedience thing that kicks in. The higher the level of the revelation, the more that we are responsible, the more difficult it's going to be, honestly. And so we start, ratcheting down the revelation. The Lord is off. He'll start to speak to us in symbols and different things. And we start to say, okay, Lord, was that you? He has, little things drop off of, This, by the way, would not launch your career. Right? I mean, if someone said, I saw the gold fall off and I knew that meant I need to invest all my money in gold, I'd look at them and say, are you nuts? Right? I mean, this is fun. Okay? This is humorous and enjoyable. But you don't plot your life by it. You say, that was really fun, Lord. That was just humorous. And I believe it was you trying to just give some encouragement. But you understand, encouragement level stuff is way different than change your life level stuff. And as we look at what the life level stuff is, we can see in this account. So, we need to follow divine revelation, but we also need to discern, which ones do you follow? Not the pepperoni dreams, that's for sure. Anyway, let's pray. Lord, thanks for the opportunity today as we study about the beginning of Messiah's life, of the Christ's life. I ask that as we follow you, that you'd speak to us, especially clearly at those critical instances, and give us hearts to receive and obey. In your name I pray, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Hey, streamers, you have the rare opportunity. Okay, it's not rare. You can come back next week, Sunday, too, 10 a.m. We'll be here enjoying ourselves, so have a great week. Happy New Year to you.